The days that followed felt different, as if the weight of the past was beginning to lift, little by little. Ethan and I had settled into an easy rhythm in the house-sharing meals, having conversations about everything from music to childhood memories, and even moments of quiet reflection. It was strange, almost surreal, how natural it felt to have him there. One morning, as I stood by the kitchen window sipping my coffee, Ethan walked in, his hair slightly tousled and his expression lighter than I'd seen before. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Morning," I replied, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. I made plenty." As he poured himself a cup, he glanced out the window. "It's a beautiful day. Do you have any plans?" I shook my head. "Not really. Saturdays are usually pretty quiet for me." "Why? Do you have something in mind?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then said, "I was thinking maybe we could go for a drive. Get out of the house for a bit. What do you think?" The idea caught me off guard, but I found myself nodding. "That sounds nice, actually. Let me grab my things." Within the hour, we were on the road. The windows rolled down as the fresh air rushed in. Ethan had suggested heading to a nearby lake, a place he said he'd visited years ago but hadn't been back to since. The drive was peaceful, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a sense of freedom. When we arrived at the lake, the sight took my breath away. The water was calm, its surface reflecting the clear blue sky. Tall trees lined the shore, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. It was the kind of place that made you forget your worries, if only for a while. Ethan parked the car and we walked down to the edge of the water. He carried a blanket and a small cooler he had packed with snacks and drinks. "You came prepared," I teased, raising an eyebrow. He chuckled. "I figured if I was going to drag you out here, I should at least make it worth your while." We spread the blanket on the grass and sat down, the silence between us comfortable and easy. As we shared sandwiches and fruit from the cooler, we talked about everything and nothing, our favourite books, places we wanted to visit, and even our most embarrassing moments. At one point, Ethan grew quiet, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You know," he began, his voice thoughtful, "I didn't think I'd feel this way again. Like there's something to look forward to." I glanced at him, my heart tightening at the vulnerability in his words. "I know what you mean," I said softly. "It's not easy to see past the hurt sometimes." He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine. "But being here, with you, it feels different. Like maybe things can get better." The sincerity in his voice left me speechless. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded, hoping he could see the understanding in my expression. As the afternoon turned to evening, we decided to take a walk along the shoreline. The golden light of the setting sun bathed everything in a warm glow, and the sound of the water lapping against the shore was soothing. At one point, Ethan stopped and picked up a smooth, flat stone. "Do you know how to skip stones?" he asked, a playful smile on his face. I laughed. "Not really. I've tried, but I'm terrible at it." He handed me the stone and showed me how to hold it, his hand brushing against mine as he adjusted my grip. "You just have to angle it right and flick your wrist, like this," he demonstrated, sending the stone skipping across the water in a series of graceful hops. "Show off," I teased, laughing as I picked up another stone. My attempt wasn't nearly as successful. It plopped into the water after a single bounce. Ethan chuckled. "Not bad for a beginner." We spent the next hour skipping stones and laughing like children. It was the kind of joy I hadn't felt in years, and I couldn't help but think about how different my life had been before Ethan arrived. That night, As we drove back home, the car was filled with a comfortable silence. I found myself glancing at Ethan now and then, wondering how someone who had been a stranger just weeks ago could feel so familiar. When we pulled into the driveway, Ethan turned off the engine but didn't move to get out of the car. Instead, he looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Sophia," he began, his voice hesitant, "I just want to say thank you for everything. You've done more for me than I can put into words." His words touched me deeply, and I felt a lump form in my throat. "You don't have to thank me," I said. "You've given me just as much, maybe more." We sat there for a moment, the air between us heavy with unspoken emotions. Finally, Ethan smiled and opened his door. "Come on," he said. "Let's get inside." As I followed him into the house, I couldn't help but wonder where this journey would take us. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel so uncertain, so lonely. I hadn't realised how much my life had settled into routine until that morning when the hot water in the bathroom refused to turn on. It was the same feeling I'd had ever since Mark passed. The world had felt like a dull echo of what it once was. Nothing felt urgent anymore. The days blurred together, and I, Evelyn, had settled into a quiet acceptance of things, even if they weren't quite right. The house had become an empty shell, its creaks and groans mirroring my own. As I stood in front of the bathroom faucet, the cold water running instead of the usual warm stream, I couldn't help but sigh. I had no idea how to fix this. Ever since Mark died, I'd found myself calling someone for every little thing that broke. The lights, the locks, the sink there was always something, and I always had to rely on someone else. It felt like I couldn't trust myself to make things work anymore. I picked up the phone and started flipping through the phone book, not expecting much, just needing someone to come and take care of this minor inconvenience. I dialed a number at random. Wells Plumbing. A deep voice answered after the first ring. "I need someone to come by and fix a broken faucet," I said, trying to keep my tone as casual as I could. "I can come today," the voice replied. "I'll be there in a few hours." I wasn't sure what it was about the voice that caught my attention, but something made me curious. Maybe it was just the fact that he sounded so calm, like he had everything under control, the kind of steadiness that had been missing from my life for so long. When the doorbell rang a few hours later, I was still lost in thought, wondering if the problem would ever feel like it could be fixed, both in the house and in me. I opened the door to find a young man standing on the porch, holding a toolbox. His posture was relaxed, but there was an unmistakable energy about him that immediately pulled me out of my daze. "Hello, I'm Lucas," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to take care of that faucet." I stepped back to let him in, and as he walked past me, I couldn't help but notice how his presence seemed to fill the space around him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his movements were confident. It wasn't just the way he moved, it was the way he carried himself, as if he had been through the motions of life 100 times and still managed to walk with purpose. He set his toolbox down by the bathroom door, and I led him down the hall. I could feel the air between us shift, though neither of us said anything. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I hadn't expected this. He was too young for someone like me to even notice, and yet I found myself drawn to him. When we reached the bathroom, Lucas stepped inside and immediately started assessing the faucet. I stood by the door, trying not to watch him too closely, but I couldn't help it. The way his arms moved as he bent down to check the pipes, the quiet professionalism that radiated from him, was almost magnetic. I hadn't seen that kind of focus in a long time. not since Mark had been around. "I'll need a few hours to fix this," Lucas said, glancing up at me for a moment. His voice was calm and assured. "The system is pretty old." "Sure," I answered, my voice catching slightly. I cleared my throat, feeling a little foolish. It wasn't like I hadn't had plumbers come in before, but there was something different about him, something that made my chest feel tight in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I tried to ignore the flutter of nerves that had unexpectedly taken hold of me. This was just a repair job after all, nothing more. But as I watched Lucas work, I couldn't help but wonder why I was so nervous. Was it the fact that he was young? Or was it just the realization that something about him was waking something in me that had been dormant for so long? I told myself it was nothing. Just the stress of the broken faucet and the day's routine getting to me. But when I handed him a towel and our hands brushed for a split second, the contact sent a shiver up my spine. My breath caught, and for a moment I just stood there staring at him. "Thank you," Lucas said, his voice bringing me back to the present. He didn't seem to notice the moment that had passed between us, but I felt it. I felt it in the air. There was something unspoken, something I couldn't quite place. As he continued working, I found myself pacing the bathroom. My hands were restless, unsure of what to do. I could feel my eyes drifting back to him, even though I tried not to look. He was so focused, so intent on fixing the faucet, that it was almost as if he wasn't aware of the tension building between us. Finally, I blurted out, "Not many young plumbers around these days." The words felt awkward as soon as they left my mouth, but I couldn't stop myself. It was as if I needed to fill the silence with something. I didn't answer right away. The idea of meeting him outside of the context of a work-related situation sent a rush of nerves through me. I wasn't sure what it was that made me hesitate, but I found myself questioning if this was something I should do. A part of me felt the tug of curiosity, the part that wanted to learn more about him, to understand the mystery that seemed to surround him. But there was another part of me, the cautious part, that told me to be careful. I had been alone for a long time, and I had become accustomed to my solitude. I think that would be nice," I finally said, surprising myself more than anyone else. Lucas let out a relieved laugh, and I could almost hear the smile in his voice. "Great! How about tomorrow afternoon?" "Sure," I said, the words slipping out before I could second-guess myself. "That sounds good." "All right, I'll text you the details. Looking forward to it, Evelyn?" I hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of excitement and uncertainty. It was just coffee, I told myself. Just two people talking. But something about it felt significant. I hadn't felt this way in a long time, not since before everything had changed with Mark. The next day, I found myself preparing for the meeting with an unusual sense of anticipation. I put on something simple, but it felt different than my usual routine. I was dressing for something I hadn't done in years. When Lucas walked into the coffee shop, I recognized him immediately. He wasn't dressed in his usual work clothes. Instead, he wore a casual shirt and jeans, his presence still carrying that same quiet confidence. His hair was a little messier than usual, and the light of the afternoon sun seemed to catch the edges of his face just right. He looked relaxed, more human than I had seen him before, and it made something inside me stir. "Evelyn," he said with a smile as he approached. "It's good to see you." "You too," I replied, standing up to greet him. "Thanks for meeting me," he nodded. "Of course. I'm glad you said yes." We both sat down at a small table near the window. The conversation started slowly, a little awkward at first. We talked about the weather, the usual pleasantries. But the more we spoke, the more comfortable I became. There was something about him that made me feel at ease. His easy smile, the way he listened when I spoke it all, felt genuine. "I've been thinking about what you said last time," Lucas said after a while, his voice quieter now, "about how things change when you lose someone." I looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "The way you've been handling everything, it's not easy, I can tell, but it seems like you're finding a way through it," he said, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity I hadn't expected. For a moment, I was quiet. I hadn't expected him to understand, much less to mention it. But there was something in his words that made me feel seen, like I wasn't just some stranger to him. "I guess you could say I'm getting by," I said softly, the weight of my words sinking in. "But I'm not sure if I'm truly living." He nodded, his gaze never leaving mine. "Sometimes it's hard to move forward, but you're doing it. It's small steps, right?" There was a quiet comfort in his presence. It wasn't the kind of thing I had expected, but somehow it felt like it was exactly what I needed. A connection, even if it was just a brief moment in time. The conversation flowed easily after that. We talked about work, about life, about the things we were passionate about. The time passed quickly, and before I knew it, the coffee cups were empty and the sun was beginning to set. "I'm really glad we did this," I said, feeling a warmth in my chest. "I didn't expect it to be so nice." Lucas smiled, his eyes softening. "I'm glad too. Maybe we can do it again sometime." I looked at him, the idea settling in my mind. I wasn't sure where this would go, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like there was a possibility of something new, something unexpected. "Yeah," I said, a smile forming on my lips. "I'd like that."